There is a city in New York where George Washington headquartered the Continental Army, where the fate of the Republic was debated in a stone farmhouse overlooking the Hudson, and where your chance of being a violent crime victim is now 1 in 35. There is a city named after one of the natural wonders of the world that lost 54% of its population and was poisoned by 21,000 tons of buried toxic waste. There is a city in central New York where 9% of children tested in 2023 had elevated blood lead levels, and black children were poisoned at nearly 6 times the rate of white children. And there is a town in the Mohawk Valley that was once the carpet manufacturing capital of the United States and now houses an off-track betting parlor where the downtown mall used to be. New York is the most famous state in America. When people say New York, they mean a single city at the southern tip. They do not mean the 54,000 square miles above it. We found 20 places in upstate New York you should never move to. Backed by FBI crime data, census poverty figures, and the kind of honest assessment that a Zillow listing will never give you. Subscribe to this channel. We do the research that the real estate agents skip. Let us count them down. Number 20, Watertown, Jefferson County. 25 miles south of the Thousand Islands and entirely dependent on an army base for its economic survival. Watertown has approximately 24,000 people and sits in the North Country, one of the most remote populated regions in the state. Fort Drum, home of the 10th Mountain Division, is the dominant employer. When the base is active and fully staffed, Watertown functions. When deployments happen or budget cuts circulate in Washington, the town holds its breath. The violent crime rate is approximately 599 per 100,000, which ranks it among the most dangerous communities in the state. In 2024, Watertown had the highest rate of rape per capita in New York. 0 murders, but the highest sexual assault rate in the state. That is a statistic that does not fit on a welcome sign. The property crime rate gives residents a roughly 1 in 25 chance of being a victim. The winters are among the harshest in the eastern United States, with lake-effect snow from Lake Ontario regularly delivering over 100 inches per season. Watertown is a company town, where the company is the United States Army. If Congress ever decides the 10th Mountain Division needs to be somewhere else, Watertown becomes a very cold ghost town with a very high crime rate and no plan B. Would you bet your mortgage on a congressional vote? Because that is what living in Watertown requires. Number 19, Plattsburgh, Clinton County. A college town on Lake Champlain that sounds better than it lives. Plattsburgh has about 20,000 people and sits near the Canadian border, closer to Montreal than to Albany. The former Plattsburgh Air Force Base closed in 1995, gutting the local economy overnight. Over 5,000 military and civilian jobs vanished. The base has been partially redeveloped into an industrial park and small airport, but the city never fully recovered the economic momentum that 5,000 paychecks once provided to every restaurant, mechanic, and landlord in a 20-mile radius. The poverty rate runs well above the state average. Crime exceeds state norms. The winters are brutal even by upstate standards, and the nearest city of any real size is Burlington, Vermont, across the lake, which tells you something about how isolated Plattsburgh is within its own state. Montreal is 60 miles north. Albany is 150 miles south. Plattsburgh sits between them, belonging fully to neither orbit, and that geographic limbo defines the place. The lake is genuinely beautiful. The Adirondacks are close. The cost of living is moderate. But moderate cost of living paired with limited employment options and 6 months of winter is not a value proposition. It is a trade-off, and the trade-off gets heavier every January. Number 18, Ogdensburg, St. Lawrence County. Welcome to one of the most remote cities in New York, where the job market is thinner than the ice on the St. Lawrence River in March. Ogdensburg has about 10,000 people and sits directly on the Canadian border. The poverty rate exceeds 25%. The median household income hovers well below the state average. The nearest significant city is Ottawa, the capital of Canada, which is closer than any major American city. That is either a geographical curiosity or a summary of the problem. Ogdensburg was once a major port and railroad hub. Ships carried goods across the Great Lakes system. Trains connected the city to the rest of the state. Both industries declined. The port declined. The railroad declined. The population declined. What did not decline was the distance from everywhere else. The Frederick Remington Art Museum is here, housing the largest collection of work by the sculptor and painter of the American West. One of America's finest small art museums sits in a city that most New Yorkers have never visited and could not find on a map. Remington's bronze cowboys stare into gallery space while the city around them continues to shrink. If your car breaks down in Ogdensburg in January, your options are limited, your cell signal is uncertain, and your AAA membership is about to be tested in ways the brochure did not mention. Number 17. Dunkirk, Chautauqua County. On the shore of Lake Erie in the far southwestern corner of the state, Dunkirk has about 12,000 people, and the quiet desperation of a town that peaked when steel and manufacturing were verbs this region conjugated daily. The poverty rate runs above 25%. The median household income is roughly $38,000. The housing stock is old, much of it built for factory workers in an era when factory work existed here, and the vacancy rate tells the story that the population numbers alone cannot. People are leaving, and the houses they leave behind are not being filled. Dunkirk is 45 miles southwest of Buffalo, and might as well be in another state for how much attention it receives. The lake is beautiful. The sunsets are free, but cheap lakefront property is not a deal, when the reason it is cheap is that nobody with options chooses to stay. One analysis noted that in communities like Dunkirk, population decline creates a cycle where the tax base shrinks, services deteriorate, and more residents leave, which shrinks the tax base further. That is not a death spiral. It is a spiral that has been spiraling for 40 years and has not hit bottom yet. Number 16. Ilion, Herkimer County. Welcome to the village that Remington built and Remington left. Ilion has about 7,500 people and sits in the Mohawk Valley along the New York State Thruway. For over 200 years, Remington Arms was the town's identity and its largest employer. The factory opened in 1816. That is older than the railroad, older than the photograph, older than the state of Texas. In 2020, Remington filed for bankruptcy, and the Ilion operation was sold to a consortium that eventually relocated much of the production out of state. The factory that defined the town for 2 centuries went quiet. The village of Herkimer next door has been ranked the single most dangerous place in New York State per capita, with a violent crime rate of 1,191 per 100,000 and a property crime rate of 8,451 per 100,000. That is a village of 7,200 people, with crime numbers that dwarf cities 20 times its size. Ilion sits directly adjacent to that reality. The Thruway runs through the Mohawk Valley, carrying millions of drivers per year past these towns at 65 miles per hour. At that speed, you see a blur of old brick and a river. You do not see the 200-year-old factory that closed, the crime rate next door, or the people figuring out what comes after the only employer they ever had disappears. The Thruway was supposed to connect these towns to the rest of the state. Instead, it made it easier to drive past them. Number 15. Monticello, Sullivan County. 90 miles northwest of New York City in the Catskills, Monticello was once the gateway to the Borscht Belt, the legendary string of Jewish resort hotels that made Sullivan County a summer destination for millions. Catskill comedy was born in these hotels. Mel Brooks, Joan Rivers, Jerry Seinfeld, and dozens of others performed in dining rooms and showrooms that no longer exist. The resorts closed. The comedians left. The tourists stopped coming. Monticello has about 7,000 people and a poverty rate that exceeds 30%. The village struggles with opioid addiction, limited healthcare access, and an aging housing stock that reflects decades of disinvestment. The Resorts World Catskills Casino opened nearby in 2018, promising economic revival. The casino has not delivered the transformation the county hoped for. The Concord Resort Hotel, which once hosted 3,000 guests a night, was demolished in 2008. The land it sat on is empty. Here is the irony that hurts. The Woodstock Festival in 1969, the most famous concert in American history, did not happen in Woodstock. It happened on Max Yasgur's dairy farm in Bethel, Sullivan County, 10 miles from Monticello. 500,000 people came to Sullivan County for 3 days of peace and music. They left. The county has been trying to get them back ever since. A place that once made America laugh and hosted the most iconic gathering of a generation now has a 30% poverty rate and a demolished resort. The Catskills are still beautiful. The comedy is gone. The music is gone. The poverty stayed. Number 14. Johnstown, Fulton County, sister city to Gloversville, and partner in one of the most complete industrial collapses in upstate history. Johnstown has about 8,000 people and a downtown that was built for a population and an economy that no longer exist. The glove and leather industry that sustained both Johnstown and Gloversville for over a century moved overseas. What remains is a town with limited employment options, below average incomes, and the particular sadness of Victorian commercial architecture, housing businesses that cannot afford to maintain it. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was raised in Johnstown. She studied law in her father's office here before becoming one of the most important figures in American women's suffrage. The woman who helped secure the right to vote grew up in a town that now struggles to give its residents a reason to stay. The cost of living is low, so is the median income, and the distance between those two numbers is where the struggle lives. Number 13. Amsterdam, Montgomery County, the carpet capital of the United States, until it was not. Amsterdam has approximately 18,000 people and sits along the Mohawk River and the Thruway, about 30 miles west of Albany. At its peak, the Bigelow, Sanford, and Mohawk Mills carpet companies made Amsterdam a manufacturing powerhouse. Immigrants poured in from Ireland, Italy, Poland, and Lithuania. The companies relocated. Coleco, the maker of Cabbage Patch Kids and ColecoVision, was also headquartered here until it went bankrupt in 1988. The poverty rate is approximately 20%. The median household income is $56,178, roughly two-thirds of the state median. Here is the detail that makes Amsterdam's decline physically visible. In the 1960s, an urban renewal highway project gutted the historic downtown, demolishing 19th century buildings to make room for a road. The road did not save the economy. It just made the emptiness more aerodynamic. The enclosed mall that was built to replace the downtown now houses doctors' offices, social services, and an off-track betting site. The carpet mills are ruins visible from the Thruway. Amsterdam is not the worst place on this list. It is the most representative, a factory town that lost its factory, filled the gap with a highway and a mall, and then lost the mall too. That is the upstate New York story in 3 acts, and Amsterdam performs all of them. Number 12. Gloversville, Fulton County. If Amsterdam is the representative example, Gloversville is the more severe case. Gloversville has about 15,000 people and was once the largest glove manufacturing center in the nation. At its peak, more than 200 glove shops operated within the city limits. Today, 0. The industry moved to cheaper labor markets across the second half of the 20th century, and nobody built a replacement economy. The poverty rate exceeds 22%. Resident reviews are devastating. One wrote that the city is infested with drugs and prostitution, and that nothing changes. Another described it as a very poverty-stricken city, where the once booming glove industry has disappeared, and there are no jobs for the hardworking family. A recent high school graduate wrote that nothing is here career-wise, and most people just smoke and drink and party. The housing is remarkably cheap. A house in Gloversville can cost less than a new sedan. That should tell you everything. When a house in New York State costs less than a used car, the market has already priced in the absence of opportunity. You are not getting a deal. You are getting what everyone who can leave has already left. If you have made it this far, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. It is completely free, and we bring new content about the places nobody else is being honest about. Number 11. Rome, Oneida County, the city that lost an Air Force base and never found a replacement. Rome has about 32,000 people and sits in the Mohawk Valley alongside Utica. Griffiths Air Force Base was the economic engine. When the base closed in 1995 under the BRAC process, Rome lost thousands of jobs overnight. The base has been partially converted into a technology park, and some of that redevelopment has shown real promise. But the broader city has not recovered to its pre-closure vitality. Many residents commute to Utica or Syracuse for work. The job market remains stagnant. Here is the history that makes this entry sting. Rome is the site of Fort Stanwix, where American forces held off a British siege during the Revolution in 1777. The battle was a turning point that helped secure the northern frontier. The city is also where the first shovel of dirt was turned for the Erie Canal in 1817, the infrastructure project that made New York the Empire State and created every major city along its route. The place where the canal began and where the Revolution was defended cannot defend its own economy against a base closure and a generation of manufacturing loss. History does not always protect the places that made it. Sometimes it just makes the decline more painful to watch. Number 10. Herkimer, Herkimer County. A village of approximately 7,200 people that was recently ranked the single most dangerous place to live in the entire state of New York. Not dangerous for a small town, dangerous for anywhere. The violent crime rate of 1,191 per 100,000 and property crime rate of 8,451 per 100,000 are staggering for a community this size. Your chance of being a victim of property crime in Herkimer is approximately 1 in 12. The village was named after Revolutionary War hero Nicholas Herkimer, who was mortally wounded at the Battle of Oriskany in 1777, one of the bloodiest engagements of the entire war. Herkimer commanded the Tryon County militia from horseback after being shot in the leg. He propped himself against a tree, lit his pipe, and continued directing the battle while bleeding to death. He died 10 days later. A village named after a man who gave his life for American freedom is now the most dangerous per capita community in the state he helped create. The Herkimer diamond mines are nearby, where visitors dig for quartz crystals in geological formations that are 500 million years old. The crystals are still there. The safety is not. Would you dig for gemstones in the most dangerous village in New York? Because the mines are open and admission is $15. Number 9. Jamestown, Chautauqua County. The birthplace of Lucille Ball and the hometown of a furniture industry that evaporated. Jamestown has about 28,000 people and sits in the far southwestern corner of the state, closer to Erie, Pennsylvania, than to any major New York city. The furniture industry that sustained the town through most of the 20th century declined as manufacturing moved overseas and cheaper domestic production emerged elsewhere. The poverty rate exceeds 25%. The median household income is well below state averages. The National Comedy Center, a museum honoring Lucille Ball and the history of American comedy, opened in 2018 and has been praised as a world-class attraction. It won a USA Today Readers' Poll for Best New Attraction in the country. But a world-class museum cannot single-handedly reverse decades of industrial decline, and the neighborhoods surrounding it tell a different story than the exhibits inside. Picture this. You walk through an interactive exhibit about the golden age of television comedy, laughing at clips from shows that defined American culture. You step outside. The street is quiet. A few storefronts are dark. The poverty rate in the neighborhood surrounding the museum exceeds the state average by double digits. The town that produced one of the most beloved entertainers in American history cannot produce enough jobs to keep its young people from leaving. Lucille Ball left Jamestown for New York City. Most people who can, do. Number 8. Elmira, Chemung County. Mark Twain spent 20 summers in Elmira and wrote much of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in a study overlooking the Chemung River Valley. He is buried in Woodlawn Cemetery on the north side of town. The literary legacy is real. So is the crime rate. Elmira has about 26,000 people and a violent crime rate of approximately 547 per 100,000. Property crime gives residents a roughly 1 in 25 chance of becoming a victim. The poverty rate exceeds 25%. A Wallet Hub study ranked Elmira the lowest scoring small city in all of upstate New York. The Chemung River, which runs through town, has flooded catastrophically multiple times, most devastatingly during Hurricane Agnes in 1972. Agnes dumped 14 inches of rain in 48 hours. The river rose to 23 feet, 6 feet above flood stage. Entire neighborhoods were submerged. Thousands of homes were destroyed. Elmira has never fully recovered from that flood, physically or economically. The city also holds a lesser-known distinction. During the Civil War, a Union prisoner of war camp held nearly 12,000 Confederate soldiers here. Roughly 3,000 of them died from disease, exposure, and neglect. They are buried in Woodlawn National Cemetery, the same cemetery where Mark Twain rests. America's greatest novelist and 3,000 men who died in a prison camp share the same burial ground in a city with a 25% poverty rate. That is not a coincidence. That is Elmira. Number 7. Poughkeepsie, Dutchess County. Not the town of Poughkeepsie, which is a suburban community with decent schools and a median household income above $100,000. The city of Poughkeepsie, which is an entirely different reality separated by a jurisdictional line and an income gap that would make your head spin. The city has about 32,000 people. The poverty rate exceeds 25%. The violent crime rate is well above state averages. IBM once employed over 30,000 people in the Poughkeepsie area. That number has been drastically reduced over decades of restructuring and offshoring. The economic contraction rippled through the city in ways that the surrounding suburbs absorbed more gently. The city contains the walkway over the Hudson, the longest elevated pedestrian bridge in the world, a stunning engineering achievement that draws tourists from across the region. It also contains concentrated poverty, aging infrastructure, and crime rates the tourists crossing 212 feet above the river never see from that height. The walkway is free. The view is extraordinary. The city beneath it is struggling, and the distinction between the city and the town of Poughkeepsie is the kind of New York jurisdictional quirk that costs people real money when they do not check the exact address before signing a lease. Town of Poughkeepsie, median household income, $111,615. City of Poughkeepsie, poverty rate 25%. Same name, different planet. Number 6. Utica, Oneida County. Welcome to the city that the thruway both connected and bypassed. Utica has approximately 65,000 people and sits in the Mohawk Valley, roughly 90 miles west of Albany. The crime rate is 71% above the national average. Property crime gives residents approximately a 1 in 31 chance of becoming a victim. The poverty rate exceeds 25%. Utica was once a textile powerhouse. Utica sheets, Utica towels. The brand name was the city name. The mills closed. The name survived on products made elsewhere. Here is what makes Utica complicated, rather than simple. The city has become one of the most significant refugee resettlement destinations in the northeastern United States. Bosnian, Burmese, Somali, Karen, and other refugee communities have brought genuine cultural vitality, new businesses, and population stability to a city that was hemorrhaging residents for decades. The Bosnian community alone has revitalized entire neighborhoods on the east side. New restaurants, new shops, new energy in buildings that had been vacant. But revitalization in some neighborhoods and persistent poverty in others can coexist in the same city. And they do. The Utica that appears in refugee success stories and the Utica that appears in crime data are the same city. The distance between those two narratives is measured in blocks, not miles. Would you move to a city where the cultural renaissance is real and the crime rate is also real, and both of them exist on the same street? That is the Utica question, and the answer depends entirely on which block you choose. If you have made it this far, consider liking this video and subscribing. It is completely free, and we bring new content about the places nobody else is being honest about. Number 5. Binghamton, Broome County. IBM arrived in Endicott, adjacent to Binghamton, in 1911. At its peak, IBM employed over 16,000 people in the Triple Cities area. The company was so dominant that locals called the region IBM country. Then IBM contracted, and contracted, and contracted. Binghamton has about 47,000 people. The median household income is approximately $44,331, the seventh lowest among cities in the state. The poverty rate is approximately 33%, making it the fifth poorest city in New York. The violent crime rate is 798 per 100,000. The property crime rate is 4,288 per 100,000. And then there is the flooding. The Susquehanna River and Shenango River converge here, and when they rise into living rooms. Major floods devastated the city in 2006 and 2011. Thousands of homes were damaged or destroyed. Some neighborhoods have been flooded and rebuilt and flooded again within a single decade. The city was built at the confluence of two rivers because that was a strategic advantage in the 19th century. In the 21st century, it is a liability that insurance companies quantify and residents endure. Here is the detail that summarizes Binghamton. The spaghetti, a marinated meat sandwich on Italian bread, is the local culinary identity and the subject of fierce regional pride. The Spidey Fest draws crowds every summer. The sandwich is genuinely good. The economy surrounding it is genuinely not. A metropolitan area that IBM built and IBM left now anchors its civic identity to a sandwich festival and hopes the rivers behave. That is either resilience or resignation. In Binghamton, those have been the same thing for 30 years. Number 4. Schenectady, Schenectady County. General Electric was founded here. Thomas Edison's laboratory was here. Charles Steinmetz, the wizard of electricity who solved the mathematics of alternating current, worked here. The company that helped electrify the modern world operated from Schenectady for over a century. At its peak, GE employed more than 30,000 people in the city. Then GE shrank its footprint, and shrank it again and again. Schenectady has about 67,000 people. The violent crime rate is approximately 806 per 100,000. Property crime runs at 2,702 per 100,000, giving residents approximately a 1 in 39 chance of having their property stolen or damaged. One analysis ranked Schenectady the 7th most dangerous city in New York State. The Stockade District, one of the oldest continuously inhabited neighborhoods in America, dating to the 1600s, sees frequent burglaries. A neighborhood older than the country it belongs to has a burglary rate that exceeds state averages. The city has invested significantly in downtown revitalization. Proctor's Theater is a genuine cultural anchor. Rivers Casino opened in 2017. But a renovated theater district and persistent neighborhood poverty are not opposites. They are neighbors. In Schenectady, they share a zip code. The electricity that GE invented here flows to every outlet in America. The prosperity that GE created here left with the jobs. The city that helped light the world has neighborhoods where the streetlights need replacing. That is not a metaphor. That is a municipal budget problem. Number 3. Niagara Falls, Niagara County. 12 million tourists visit Niagara Falls every year. They see the water. They do not see the city. Niagara Falls has approximately 48,000 people. In 1960, it had 102,394. That is a 54% population loss, the largest percentage decline of any city in New York State over that period. The poverty rate is 23.7%, which is 41% higher than the state average. The median household income is $49,101. The violent crime rate is approximately 900 per 100,000. Nearly 44% of the city's property is tax exempt, including the Seneca Niagara Casino, which means the remaining taxpayers are funding infrastructure built for twice the current population on half the expected tax base. Here is what nobody tells you about Niagara Falls. The Love Canal disaster happened here. In the 1940s and 1950s, Hooker Chemical dumped 21,000 tons of toxic waste into an abandoned canal. Homes and a school were built on top of it. In 1978, the chemicals surfaced. Residents reported birth defects, miscarriages, and cancers at alarming rates. President Carter declared a federal emergency. Over 800 families were permanently relocated. The disaster became the catalyst for the Federal Superfund program, which now oversees the cleanup of hazardous waste sites across the entire country. The most famous waterfall on Earth and one of the most infamous environmental crimes in American history share the same city. The tourists take photos facing the water. If they turned around, they would see a city that lost half its people, was poisoned by its own industry, and now survives on the revenue generated by visitors who stay an average of 2 hours before driving somewhere else. 12 million tourists per year. Average visit, 2 hours. That is 24 million hours of tourist attention poured into a city where 1 in 4 residents lives in poverty. The waterfall has been there for 12,000 years. The tourists leave in 120 minutes. The residents stay and carry the rest. Number 2. Syracuse, Onondaga County. Syracuse has one of the highest concentrated poverty rates of any city in the United States. That is not a regional ranking. That is a national one. The city has approximately 148,000 people. The poverty rate is 26%. Among children, the rate is substantially higher. A report from CNY Fair Housing found that the number of racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty in Syracuse has grown in recent years, not shrunk. 5 years ago, Syracuse led the nation in the highest concentration of poverty among Black and Hispanic residents. The problem has gotten worse. 9% of Syracuse children tested in 2023 had elevated blood lead levels. In Onondaga County, 11.6% of black children had elevated levels in 2021, compared to 2% of white children. The houses doing the poisoning were built before 1950. Landlords are not required to remediate the lead until after a child has already tested positive. Translation: the system waits for a child to be poisoned before it addresses the poison. The violent crime rate is approximately 765 per 100,000. Syracuse had 22 murders in 2024 and the third highest burglary rate in the state. The South Side absorbs 38% of the city's violent offenses, concentrated near abandoned industrial sites that once employed the people whose grandchildren now live in poverty around them. Here is what makes Syracuse's story especially bitter. The city was built on salt. The Onondaga Salt Springs made Syracuse the salt capital of America in the 19th century. The Erie Canal ran through it. The New York State Fair is still held here every summer, drawing over 1 million visitors. Syracuse University sits on the hill above the city, a globally respected research institution with a $1.7 billion endowment. The city, at the bottom of the hill, has childhood lead poisoning rates that belong in a public health emergency declaration. The salt that built Syracuse is long gone. The poverty that replaced it is generational, structural, and concentrated in the same neighborhoods where the factories used to be. The university on the hill keeps climbing. The city at the bottom keeps sinking. The distance between those two realities is a 10-minute drive and a 40-year income gap. That is not two cities. That is one city that functions as two, and the zip code you are born into determines which one you live in. Number 1. Newburgh, Orange County. George Washington headquartered the Continental Army in Newburgh from 1782 to 1783. The war ended here. The Newburgh Conspiracy, a potential military coup against the fledgling civilian government, was diffused here when Washington addressed his officers in a stone farmhouse overlooking the Hudson, and in a single gesture put on his reading glasses and said, "Gentlemen, you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray but almost blind in the service of my country." His officers wept. The coup dissolved. Civilian control of the military was preserved. The Republic survived before it had begun. That farmhouse is now Washington's headquarters state historic site, the first state historic site in the nation, designated in 1850. The city it overlooks has a violent crime rate of 1,129 per 100,000, the highest in the state of New York. The poverty rate is 24.3%. The population is approximately 28,000 and declining. Your chance of being a victim of violent or property crime in Newburgh is 1 in 35. More than 96% of communities in New York are safer. Here is what nobody tells you. Newburgh contains one of the finest collections of pre-Civil War architecture in the entire Hudson Valley. Federal, Greek Revival, Italianate, and Victorian homes line the streets, many designed by or influenced by Andrew Jackson Downing, the father of American landscape architecture, who lived and worked in Newburgh and whose ideas shaped Central Park, the National Mall, and the grounds of the Smithsonian. The architecture is extraordinary. The vacancy rate is devastating. Here is the mechanism. In the 1960s, the Newburgh Beacon Bridge opened, carrying Interstate 84 across the Hudson and bypassing the city's waterfront entirely. The ferry closed. Suburban malls opened outside city limits, draining retail from downtown. Lloyd's Department Store and Mid-Valley Mall pulled businesses out of the city core. Simultaneously, the industrial base that had made Newburgh a major economic hub between New York City and Albany relocated to cheaper markets. The city lost its industry and its commerce in the same generation. What remained was the architecture, the location, and the people who could not afford to leave. Picture this. You are standing on a hill in Newburgh overlooking the Hudson River. The view is the same view George Washington saw when he decided not to become a king. The river is wide and slow. The light is the particular golden light of the Hudson Valley in October that has inspired painters for 200 years. Behind you, the stone farmhouse where the Republic was saved is open for tours at $5 admission. Below you, in the city that surrounds this historic site, violent crime exceeds 1,100 per 100,000. 1 in 4 residents lives in poverty, And some of the most beautiful 19th century houses in New York stand vacant with plywood over the windows. The place where American democracy was preserved is now the most dangerous city in the state. That is not a metaphor. That is a data point. And the distance between the $5 tour of where the Republic was saved and the 1 in 35 chance of victimization in the streets outside is the most honest summary of upstate New York's relationship with its own history that exists anywhere. These 20 places are real. The crime data is real. The poverty figures, the population collapse, the lead-poisoned children, the 54% decline, the 1 in 35 odds, the carpet mills turned off track betting parlors, the glove factories turned ruins, the flooded river towns, and the emptied military bases are all real. New York is an extraordinary state with extraordinary history, extraordinary architecture, and extraordinary natural beauty. But not every corner of it is equal, and cheap housing is not a deal when the cost is measured in safety, schools, and the daily reality of living somewhere the rest of the state forgot. The data says you should know before you go. Like this video if you almost moved somewhere on this list and nobody warned you. Subscribe because the honest research about where to live and where to avoid is the kind of thing you want before you need it, not after.